Hello and welcome back to the Degen crew, where I'm trying to grow my poly market account by finding missed price predictions. Here I am on oil markets again. I apologize if you watched yesterday's video. The sound was not working. I definitely did something wrong. It was my fault. But here we are. I predicted almost everything correctly that was happening last night into today. If we go into the oil futures, yesterday oil futures spiked to about $115 per barrel. This was on a Sunday evening. The reason for that, I think, was because supply was being disrupted. So there were some strikes on some big supply sources in Iran and Israel. So both of them were hit, affecting supply. Oil prices spiked to $110 a barrel, which definitely affects the price at the pump. They're definitely in between a rock and a hard place right now. They don't want the U.S. doesn't want oil prices to spike too much, affecting consumers, because everything is based on the price of oil. Especially when Trump ran on drill baby drill. You don't want to have the price of oil going up too much. The one thing that he said that was a little bit scary was that the price of oil would be a short-term effect and was a small price to pay for global safety, which to me means that he is okay with the price of oil going higher than people think it might go. The correct prediction for the minimal or the least amount of risk was the $55 per barrel for oil, because it seemed like the price was creeping up. And to me, the downside was around $60, if not 60, a little bit higher, around $60 to $65. So the 55 gave me a good risk balance. I ended up selling this yesterday for 98 cents, taking the profit on it, just so I could lock it in and start using this money for something else. I was leaving 1% on the table, but I was willing to do that just to be able to take the liquidity out. But here is everything that I was looking at. So what was more likely to happen? Price controls or the U.S. releasing strategic reserve of oil? So hopping into chat, this is what I was looking at. Historically, how much oil, when have they released their strategic barrels? Has it happened before? So specifically price controls. So price controls have happened. They happened specifically in the 1970s during a very similar situation to this. So this situation was the most unlikely. It's more likely that they would release strategic reserves. They have strategic reserves for this exact reason. The U.S. holds, I think, 400 million barrels of oil for war specifically, or anytime the price of oil jumps up way too high. And historically, they usually release it when the price of oil starts getting around $120 per barrel. And that's where we were yesterday. And that's why I thought potentially today or tomorrow, they would start releasing or announcing that they would release strategic reserves. And that's all it takes, is just an announcement. But hopping into how that affects markets as soon as they announce something like that. So if they announce strategic reserves, and it doesn't have to be just the U.S., it could be any country. Usually it affects the oil prices immediately to the downside, about 2 to 7%. In this case, we went and corrected from 115 all the way back down to $84 per barrel. So it almost moved about 30%. But what I'm going to be watching out for is, so it corrected about that. It usually corrects about 10% in the first 24 hours. But if it looks like a conflict will continue, the price of oil slowly creeps back up. So what I'm watching for here is, they've announced as of today that they'll probably be releasing strategic oil. They're going to be talking about it tomorrow. So that's why the market started going back down. But what we'll be looking for is the conflict. If it looks like it's going to continue, especially if it looks like it's going to continue longer than people think, then that strategic reserve release and the amount that it corrected will start creeping back up. So that's it. That's the $120 oil per barrel price. And here it is, the price trigger, historic price trigger amount between 80 and 120. So with all that information, what do we do with it? So let's hop into Polymarket. The two other things that I was looking at was, so what if the US wanted the price of oil higher? One, because they produce a lot of oil, and two, because at the end of March, so March 31st, I think it's March 31st to April 2nd, Trump does meet with China, and China imports almost 50% of their oil. So to have the most negotiating power, what if they wanted the price of oil to be higher? So that was scenario number one. And I was thinking, if they don't release strategic oil within the next 2 days, this is what they're focusing on, and this is why they wanted to do this, was just to have a negotiating power with China. And thing number two was, do you create inflation to pay down your debt because you just had tariffs removed? So those were the two scenarios. But scenario one, they said they were going to release as they're going to talk about releasing tomorrow. And scenario number two isn't necessarily a good political move because you're hurting your people to bring down inflation. So not the best scenario. So really. It was really that they should release strategic reserves soon. So what do we do with that information? Hop into Polymarket. So to me, the downside, buying the 55 was your best bet, but this is already at almost 98 cents. So that one I was taking profits on. But the best move here was just to stay out of the market. We didn't have enough information. So the best thing to do was stay out of the market, mainly because we didn't know, or I didn't know how much it would move in between yesterday and when they announced strategic reserves. So for example, yesterday it was up almost 26%. So if it went up another 10%, 20% by the time they announced strategic reserves, some of those predictions would have resolved. So to me, it was just stay out of it, wait for more information, which we now have. So I'll be keeping an eye on this, specifically, will the conflict last longer? And then I'll start buying to the upside on the yeses if it starts looking like it's going to last longer. And you'd buy between the 84 and where it went to on Sunday. So between 84 and 115 to the 120. If the conflict looks like it gets worse or is going to continue longer than they think, then you can probably start buying that prediction higher. But if it looks like it's going to end, then the prediction, all the higher ones will resolve to no by the end of the month. So that's it. Hope that was helpful, and have a good rest of your day.